Good morning. Welcome to Saturday Sampler. It's my pleasure to be here. It's a good morning here on the West Coast, and just to let you know what kind of a week it's been for me. We are in the process of moving to Northern California from Southern California, and the loaders come on Tuesday to load everything up. Um, over here over my shoulder, you can see a box and some things, and all the stuff is off the walls. So basically, what we have left to do is this stuff that I'm using today for the recording and for Facebook, and then just a few other odds and ends here in the quilt room, and then a few things in the garage, but we're pretty much packed. It's been a very, very long week. It's been filled with a lot of having my head in a box, and our house kind of smells like cardboard. So that's where we've been, and I take my little breaks and come in and do my work in here. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what we're going to do today. First of all, we're in section number 2, and we're adding to the applique that we talked about last time and the blocks that we sewed together. So let me drop the camera and want to share with you, and you can see stuff behind me in just a minute, and I'll turn to that shortly so that you can see. So last week we did these 2 blocks for section number 2. We talked about placement of the flowers up here. I put the vase in position that I wanted it to be, and then I placed my flowers that I had turned with freezer paper and starch is the method that I really like. I do several different things, but when it comes down to it, I really do like the freezer paper and starch turn method of that. So once I had those in place and put down on there, then I can position, the vase on top. But first, I finished these 2 blocks and sewed the red panel onto the right. So today's work will be to sew the vase down. If you're doing it by hand, if you're doing it by machine, the same thing would apply. You would go around it by machine. And today I'm going to show a couple of stitches. Not that you would use that on this vase, but however you choose to stitch that down by machine or by hand. So we're going to, you will make the vase this week, and you're going to make each of these flowers and the stem and leaves here for only this flower. We're going to get to this one in the coming weeks with the sunflowers and putting that together after we get the next section. So I'm kind of taking it in sections so that it's a little bit easier to do hand stitching, and really to get it under your machine and do the machine stitching as well. So that's where we're going with that today. And here is the pattern for that. Now, if you have the die cuts, you need 5 circles for the outside of the flower. For the center of the flower, you're going to need 5 also. And then on the leaves, just make sure that you pay attention that you also need a mirror image one on both of these. And then you only need the one vase. And then on the center stem, you just need to make the center stem, and I will probably do that, and I will do that by freezer paper. And then again, you're going to make one regular and one as a mirror image. So you've got those. And what I do if I do not have a light box, last time I showed you with the light box, so I will trace these 2 as is from the front of the pattern, but then I go to the back and I can see through my paper, so I take a Sharpie and I outline what's there, so that now I can take my double-sided fusible and I can see that so much better through the double-sided fusible. And I want to talk a little bit about the double-sided fusible that I'm really liking for a couple of reasons. This Quilter Select Appli-Stick, and what's nice about it, and as we get to cutting and making our flower today, you're going to find that on this side there it's a little bit shiny, and that's the glue, and you're going to press that to the wrong side of your fabric, and then when you take the paper that's on the front off, it remains sticky so that you can put it on your fabric and remove it multiple times until you get your flowers where you want it before you press them for permanency. So love that very much in terms of our our fusible that I'm using. So what the other thing that I kind of noticed is that this circle is the same size as the inside of this Applipop. And I don't know if you've ever seen the Applipops before, and I'm going to show you how those work and answer a couple of questions that I've heard before, or you can use the perfect circles, because this large one will also fit if you have the package with the larger circles in it. They will also fit. So at this point in time, I am going to take the graphite pencil, because I find that it works really well on this paper, and I'm going to use the inside of this ring because it's sturdy, and that way I don't have to necessarily draw it. But this pencil works really great because it shows up. So I can just take the graphite Applique pencil, and whoops, I missed a little bit there. And so you get a perfect circle with that, and you're ready to place that on your material that you're going to be using. And so I'll use a little piece of this, and I want to press it to the back side of my fabric. All right, and I'm letting enough on the sides. I usually rough cut it so I don't waste the fabric. I kind of left the fabric more of this than I needed to, because once you have that pressed onto your fabric, now I'm going to cut it out exactly on the line for raw edge applique. So I'm going to take my scissors, and I'm really loving these Applique scissors, because your hand, it kind of forces you not to squeeze really hard and, attack. It gives your hand a little bit of a rest. And I like that because I'm experiencing, a little bit of carpal tunnel. And the other thing that I really like about it is that, it just, I don't know, it kind of helps you cut a little bit better. And remember to always cut in the sweet spot. Of your scissors, which is kind of to the middle, from the bottom to the middle of the scissors, and that keeps your cutting line really smooth on there. And I was a little bit out of camera view. My apologies for just sitting there looking at my mat. So I've got that now completed and cut out, and then I just take a pin and make a tear in that paper, and that way I can get that paper off really easily from the back side of that. And you notice how it is sticking to my finger. It is going to stick to fabric And this is the nice part. You can pull it off and reposition it if it's not in the right spot. And you can do that multiple times and it stays put on your fabric. So I really like that process with this particular double-sided fusible. So now the first thing that I want to show you today, let me get rid of some of my pencils and things that I have in front of me, is a couple of sewing machine stitches, because raw edge applique, we often do it as machine applique with raw edge. And there's two stitches that I tend to like to use when I have a center here to add texture to this, and I'm using a green thread just so it will show up for you on screen. Normally I would use a red thread here so that it blends in. So this is a blanket stitch, and I will share a little bit of that with you in just a second. And this one, I'm not sure what it's called. It sort of looks a little bit like a fly stitch, but I like the fact that it goes into the fabric, the center part, and it also echoes out here. Normally I shortened the length of that, but I left it long just so that you could see it a little bit better on camera. So this is, I would probably bring it down so that it's just coming in, a little less than 1/8 of an inch into my fabric, more like what I have here for the blanket stitch. So let's pop over to the other camera. And when you're doing the blanket stitch, don't forget to put your wide throat plate on, and not your single hole throat plate, because if you use your single hole throat plate, it's going to break your needle. So let's start in here, and let's go with the fly first. This, I don't know what this is called, but it is stitch number 1332 on my Bernina. And I want the center of this, and this wasn't set. I didn't do that at first. When you're going around a curve, you're going to want to go slow, and you're going to have to adjust every couple of stitches so that you're going with the curve and it is sticking in the inside. So I am going to break that thread for right now, and you can come back and see that that is just moving. So you can, by shortening your stitch, you can bring those closer together, and by narrowing the stitch, you can bring those in a little bit closer if you don't want them. I mean, they can be any length. I made them a little bit bigger today just so that you could see how they work on there. So then I'm going to go to 1329, which is the blanket stitch on my Bernina. And again, I want my presser foot, I want my needle coming down right at the edge, which it's not, so I'm going to adjust that just a bit. Alright, so now my needle is right next to the edge of my leaf. I would pull the bottom. I'm going to adjust that thread later. And so you're just going around this, and again, when you get to these curves on here, you just stop, and each time you just do a little bit of adjustment. And I like to count where my stitches are coming so that when I get to this point, and I let it go one time too many, so that I can adjust it so that stitch would have gone in. This is something I would go back and correct because I don't want that there. And so you're going to turn it so that your points come straight out into that. And I will do that sometimes by hand. and sometimes I'll, it works really well on the machine, and I can get that stitch to come in right at the point instead of I kind of was talking and let it go out that way. So blanket stitch is always very nice. It looks the blanket stitch looks really good, and it's a favorite. It's one of many of us use for raw edge applique. This particular one I really like as well because of the width of it that goes in and out, and you can narrow it, like I said, and shorten the stitch length as well. So those are really kind of wonderful for that. There's many stitches that one could use um, for that raw edge applique. And now I'm going to share with you some hand stitches, and the one is this one right here, which is a fly stitch. This you can do by hand as well, and I will show you a little bit what I like to do with some of my leaves on that. But this is a fly stitch, and I'm going to the edge of my circle. And the other thing that I will sometimes do is find a ring that is a little bit smaller than my circle, so that when I come in and take that bite, I keep it accurate, because I don't always see it that accurately when I am doing my stitches. So I have an embroidery needle. This is number 8 pearl cotton, and I'm going to do a quilter's knot. Most of you probably already know this. I lay it over my pointer finger, I wrap it a couple of times, and then I slide it off, and I have a knot there at the end. Okay, and so I'll come up. I'm going to leave a little bit of a loop. I'm going to come straight across from where I came up and go back and center it between where I went in and where I'm coming up, right at the edge of my circle. And by catching that, I get that V shape, and then I'm going to take a stitch down into the down to that circle that I drew, or I'm just going to eyeball it. Now, when I have a situation like this right here, I will often just make the V here until I get back around and I can take that bite back in. So what I'm going to do as I go around that part of the circle is I'm going to bring the needle up. I am going to go straight across. I'm going to come down. And because I really don't want it to bite into that on that point, I'm just going to take my stitch and go back down right where I came up with that, and keep that V going, because I want the outside to look uniform. And so I'm going to do another stitch like that one again. So I come up at the edge of the other one, leave my loop. I'm going to go down a little bit to the right of that. I want to get the point of my V halfway between those two stitches. And so now I have those two V's like that. I will secure it. And now I'm going to do another stitch. Come out from there. I'm going to go in. And now I can take that bite into my fabric again, because I'm not in the way of that point that has come out of that. So that's, how I deal with And I like this around flowers sometimes because I like that little chevron-y look to it around the flower. I wouldn't do it in green. I'm doing it in green so that you can see what's happening with it. So that's just a really fun stitch to do um, for that. So I'm going to tie that off for now, just so that it doesn't come unraveled. Not that it can't, but. And then I like also, I started it over here, and it may be hard to see on camera, but I just use a nice thread. Again, I'm going to lay that on my pointer, wrap it a couple of times, and slide it off for that quilter's knot. But if I want a leaf to look, just have some texture and a little bit of feathery out here, what I like to do is do the blanket stitch like this, but have it reversed and go outward. And so I still will hold it, but instead of coming out straight from the side of this, I'm going to angle it because I want those little thorny things, or whatever they're called, to be a little bit at an angle, and I want them to be really delicate. So it's a blanket stitch, but it looks just a little bit different because I'm angling it out. And I think I just did that wrong. Yeah, I did, because I came across. I swear that I cannot. So I'm going to just start again. I cannot walk and chew gum at the same time. I just want you guys to know that. And so I can't talk and stitch at the same time either. All right, so we'll start again, and this time I won't mess that up. Well, let's say I'm going to try not to. So came up. I've got my thread back here. I'm coming at an angle into this. I bring my thread up. Back to this. I'm going to come at it from an angle. And so it's the blanket stitch in reverse, but it's angled just a little bit. So you get that feathery like look on the outside of a leaf. And if you're doing like roses, that is just a very delicate stitch. I think you can see these a little bit better because this was going to a yellow, but you can see how delicate it is when I use a very fine thread. It's just a real feathering on the outside of that circle, which I very much like. There's other stitches that one can do with hand. If you're a Sue Spargo fan, or a Judith Montano, or any of the other stitchers that do such beautiful work, and you know lots of embroidery stitches, you might find ones that you like better. And there are several wrap stitches, and it goes by several different names. I want to talk a little bit about the wrap stitches like bullion, cast on, drizzle stitch, depending on if you're doing Brazilian embroidery or regular embroidery. You want to use a milliner's needle. All right, I'm going to try to get this on the camera so that you can see that it's very straight. With an embroidery needle, this end where the eye of the needle is, it's a little bit I don't know where you can see this the best, but it's got a little bit fatter head to it, so the thread won't pull easily through. But if you use a milliner's needle, it is the same all the way, even with the eye of the needle. So if you're doing any stitch that requires wrapping of any kind, when you pull it off, it just pulls through those wrap stitches very, very easily. So make sure that if you're doing a wrap stitch that you're using a milliner's needle, and that will make your job much, much easier. So you can go the route of stitching with your machine any number of decorative stitches. Many of these machines have hundreds of them. I like simple stitches, and so that's what I gave you today, and make your adjustments as you're going around your flowers, and if you want to add anything. The other thing that I will like to do with the fly stitch, if I do this, if I want a little bit more embellishment and add a little bit to it, I will either drop a bead at the top of each one of these, or I will go down into that V and put a French knot or a bead there instead of at the top. At the top, though, it almost looks like little crowns that are up there, which is rather cute. So, you know, there's different ways that you can embellish that and get that look that you want. So, machine, blanket stitch, whatever this stitch is, it's stitch 1332 on my Bernina. If you're doing hand stitch, that fly stitch is a favorite. This extending out blanket stitch at an angle to feather those leaves around there. Bullion stitches, cast on stitches, drizzle stitches give that flowered look. It's more rounded than this, but it gives you that same flavor of look. Before we part with today's lesson, I also would like to share with you these Applipops or perfect circles. The perfect circle gives you a very flat, piece of work. My favorite is, as I've told you before, is freezer paper and starch. But I have taken this, I have starched a piece of fabric so that it presses better, and you're going to lay this fabric on the pretty side down, and then you're going to take the circle that fits inside of it, and you're going to press that tightly in there. And I kind of like, well, today I'm going to like the hard surface better because it seems to be working better. Usually the soft one helps with that. And this is where I like to use this metal piece to bring that over, because you are pressing on metal and it gets hot. And I like this to sit for a little bit, but I really don't want to touch where I've just ironed. And the starch helps hold that in place a little bit. There's a couple things, well, see, it's popping up, so I didn't get that quite tight in there. A couple of things that I like about this. It's easy, it works really well. You need to let it sit for a bit and cool down before you pick it up and use that circle right away. So I'm going to just flatten that out a little bit more, and I'm not going to touch that metal because it's hot. And that's going to cool down. Now, one of the things that happens with the Applipop often is that you'll get that width will pop up in there. Part of me kind of likes that because if I want to make this dimensional, I'll pop a little bit of batting inside of that. I can cut the batting to the size of the ring and slip it in there, and that little bit of extra that kind of poofs out there works really great. The other thing is lay that circle down and simply press it with your iron, and it flattens it out completely, and you do not have that extra ridge on your circle as it's moving around, and that makes that really nice. The Karen K. Buckley template circles don't give you the ridge, and obviously neither does the freezer paper, so those all work really, really well for that. So for next time, um, I'm not going to be on Facebook Live next Saturday. I am going to be unpacking and getting my quilt room set, at least so that I can do in 2 weeks the show for the Facebook Live for this. So you have 2 weeks to finish up whatever, applique you need to finish here, getting your vase in. And if you, in a minute, I'm going to show you, I moved the vase over a little bit, simply because to me, if I was walking up these stairs and that vase was sitting right on the edge, I would trip over it and it would fall off. So I'm going to move it in for safety reasons, and that's just a personal preference because it certainly lines up with the edge, which is great. So I'm just a little quirky that way. Then you're going to make these 5 flowers, the stem and the leaves that are on here. You're going to create your vase. I'm going to say I would not sew the vase down yet. I would use it for placement. So I would place it where I want it to sit on my step or that block, and then get your flowers, put your flowers underneath of it and get them situated and pressed down or sewn down, whichever, if you're doing hand or machine applique. And then leaving your vase for next time, you've got it made. It's just waiting to be attached. Because next time in 2 weeks we're going to work on the next blocks, and we're going to sew that that red section on here, and then we can put the vase onto our step where we want, where we had temporarily placed it. Then we're going to move into the sunflowers, so that we can put those on to that step and get those sewn on, so we don't have a lot of bulk anytime that we're sewing, because you could sew all of the blocks at once and get the whole background done and then do all of the flowers. But for me, I like to take it in steps, just because it's fun, and this is such a pretty quilt, but also so I don't have the bulk either under my machine or when I'm hand sewing in my lap. So either way, I like to kind of do it in phases. So we'll move on from there, but this next 2 weeks, get this finished and that finished. And if you look behind me, I'll move away. So these are on, and now I need to sew that down. And as you can see, I did move it over a little bit so I wouldn't trip on it when I'm walking up my steps for that. So that those are my tips for today. And honestly, from time to time, I'm asked if we can mix turned applique and raw edge. And my answer is yes, because if there's an intricate piece that's going to take just a monumental effort for me to turn and place, I will do it by hand, or by machine and raw edge, but I'll still do some hand stitching around it. And for the rest of it, I will turn and hand stitch it down. So I have mixed them, and most of the time it's not that obvious. So it's totally up to you, because there's some places in this particular one where you might, if you are doing hand applique, when we get to the bird, you may choose to do that as a raw applique. It might be a lot easier than if we do it. And we're gonna talk about the bird and some possibilities with it. But I'm just looking forward to seeing what you come up with. And if you've been in the forum, if some pictures of the quilts have been coming up, which I dearly love that you're putting them in there. But there's some interesting ideas and different things that people are doing, which is wonderful. And they're looking pretty and they're fun, and I can't wait to see them with the flowers on them this, as we're coming up on this week. And so if you have an opportunity to put your pictures up on the forum, please do, or you can send them to me privately at my email address. I know some of you have done that as well, and that's great. At Divine Quilts with 2 E's, DEE, Vine Quilts at gmail.com. So if you have questions, but there is in the forum a place for you to put your questions, and that's preferred for you to go to the forum and do that placement. But it's already a happy quilt, and I'm excited to keep going on that. And again, I will see you in 2 weeks. So enjoy yourself. If you're taking trips or going on vacation, just have a blast, and blessings to you all. Bye-bye.